Mr. Bilčik, do you observe the situation in Serbia? Is Serbia out of European focus during the pandemic?
Very good afternoon, and thank you for this opportunity to hold this interview. It's a real pleasure, and I think just the fact that you and I are talking today is a real proof that Serbia is hardly out of the focus during the pandemic. I've been very engaged in following and watching the situation in Serbia since the start of the pandemic. Of course, as the European Parliament's rapporteur, I was heavily involved in Serbia last year and also earlier this year in the interparliamentary dialogue, inter-party dialogue, which went on in the Skupština. And as soon as the pandemic began, of course, we cannot be on the ground. I cannot be on the ground. I'm really sorry about that. It is frustrating. But we have very closely followed the situation in Serbia. I'm in touch with my colleagues on the ground, with Ambassador Sem Fabrizi, and of course with my partners, MEPs in the European Parliament. We also consult very closely with the European Commission. And I can also tell you I've been talking with the new EU Special Representative for the Western Balkans and the Belgrade-Pristina dialogue, Miroslav Lajčák. So we are very much in touch, and we are very much watching the situation in Serbia. And, we are also waiting for the pandemic to slow down. We are hopeful this will happen. And I hope this will allow us to get back to the political calendar. And of course, we all want to see Serbia as a country which manages well the upcoming parliamentary and local elections. So, of course, we are watching and we are engaged. The integration is not put on hold. As a matter of fact, and quite honestly, Europe is not only watching, Europe is helping, but Europe is engaged. Even though the pandemic did start and began to spread across Europe at the end of February, last month in March, the ministers of the European Union, on the basis of the recommendation by the European Commission and also our support in the European Parliament, decided to add a whole new dynamic to the EU accession negotiations, opening up the accession talks with the partners in North Macedonia and Albania. There are now as many as 4 countries in the Western Balkans that are going to be negotiating the terms of EU accession. So on the contrary, we are engaged. We are increasing the number of countries negotiating the terms of the EU accession. We just appointed an EU special representative to deal with the dialogue between Belgrade and Pristina, but also other security issues in the region. And I would also like to underline that the West as a whole is engaged. Our partners in Skopje, North Macedonia, has become the member of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. So on the contrary, we are very much engaged. And of course, we in the European Parliament will be discussing next week online during our teleworking session in the Foreign Affairs Committee, the recommendations for the upcoming Western Balkans Summit during the Croatian EU Council presidency. Of course, it is not going to take place physically in Zagreb. It will take place later. I hope we are able to meet physically during the summit, but if not, it'll take place online. But we are still very much pushing for practical recommendations so that enlargement indeed moves on, integration moves on. And we expect the same movement from our partners on the ground.
How do you see the relations and rhetoric of Serbian officials towards EU aid and support on the one hand and Chinese but also Russian aid on the other? Serbian president spoke by phone with the president of China on Tuesday. Earlier, he spoke with Russian president.
Look, Serbian president has also spoken to other people. I know over the weekend he spoke to Miroslav Lajčák, with whom I've been in touch. And I myself am also in touch with the Serbian officials. So I think what's important here is the facts. And the facts speak very much about the European Union engagement. And I want to underline that Europe has been engaged in very practical terms. It's not just about what's been happening since the start of the pandemic, but the fact that Serbia, and I realize, and I really want to underline this, we are not only watching the situation in Serbia, but I also very much feel for a number of people who have been infected, who are fighting for their lives in the Serbian hospitals. And I also want to congratulate all the health workers in Serbia who are engaged in this. I think this is really an engagement which we see all across Europe. But I want to underline that the European Union has been helping Serbia to prepare for a situation like this for a number of years. If you calculate the amount of investment that has gone into Serbia's hospitals over the past decade, with the help of the European Union, it is precisely the ability of those hospitals today and the doctors and the nurses there to deal with the rising number of patients that helps Serbia cope with the crisis. So the EU, is not there here and now only. It's been in Serbia, and it's been helping and working with Serbia for a number of years, and this is important. But also during this crisis, we have already in the European Parliament approved an important financial package, which has released a much more flexibility into the European Solidarity Fund. The European Commission has redirected millions of euros to help Serbia fight the pandemic. Immediately, there are 15 million euros available for the fight of the pandemic. And also, I want to underline that we have pledged over 80 million euros for the social and economic reconstruction and our ability to deal with the social and economic consequences of the pandemic. So really, there are very tangible ways of how the European Union is helping. Maybe the last point, which I'll underline here, yes, I've seen the airplanes landing in Belgrade from different parts of the world, but I also want to say that a number of these air flights have been funded through EU money. The European Union has sent in help and delivered on that help to Serbia. So I want to really assure the Serbian citizens, and I've said this in public media in Serbia, and I'll say it here again. The EU has been here in better times. It's here in the worst times, but it's here to really help the people of Serbia throughout this crisis and beyond. I think we all appreciate all the help and all the solidarity which we in Europe, and this definitely includes the Balkans of Serbia, are receiving. But I also want to underline that had it not been perhaps for the late Chinese public reaction to the outbreak of the coronavirus in the first place last year in China, we might not be facing the same consequences we are facing right now. China was very late in public communication about the pandemic, about the real threat of COVID-19. And we should also remember this when we talk about why we are facing such dire consequences of this pandemic in Europe.
Do you have the impression that corona crisis has distanced Serbia and the EU? Are you concerned about criticism of the level of EU assistance?
Look, I want to again stick to the facts, and I think people in Serbia should know the facts and see the facts. And I will just repeat some of the key facts here. The European Union has really been on the ground, has been working hard to help the people in Serbia. We in the European Union may not be the best ones when it comes to the ability to take the most effective way of a photo opportunity when we deliver help, but we deliver help in practical ways. And we are also committed in long-term ways because, of course, we are engaged in redirecting the existing EU funds, but we are also getting ready to pledge a big economic help and investment to the region as a result of the upcoming Western Balkan Summit, whenever we can organize this. So I want to assure the citizens in Serbia that we are really working hard on the ground. And if you look at the events of the past weeks, we have seen an increasing level of strategic commitments to political dialogue through the appointment of Miroslav Lajčák, to enlargement through a whole new dynamic in this process, but also through the assistance right now, through the assistance in very practical terms when we have delivered medical supplies to the citizens of Serbia. And when we are committed to working on the ground with the authorities in Serbia to deliver more based on what they need. So really, I think we need to repeat the facts and repeat the facts all over again. We are also engaged in a number of disinformation campaigns which are spreading across Europe. And I am very concerned about these disinformation campaigns. And the best way to fight these campaigns on all fronts is to do it with facts.
Are there any specific EU requests or expectations when it comes to cooperation and relations between Serbia and China?
Look, there is a basic framework which we have in negotiating the terms of our future relations. I'm hopeful that the accession negotiations can carry on. We are committed to carrying them on, and that they can produce results. And an important part of accession negotiations are also negotiations on alignment when it comes to external relations, when it comes to foreign policy. And the main expectation here is that Serbia over time really aligns with the common foreign and security policy priorities of the European Union, and also with the trade and investment priorities of the European Union. So when it comes to discussing the relations between Serbia and China, what's important is to underline that we would like to see more convergence on the part of Serbia with the foreign and security policy priorities of the European Union, and with the investment and trade commitments of the European Union. That is the baseline. And by the time Serbia really approaches the closure of accession negotiations, there has to be clarity that if Serbia is to be a full-fledged member state of the European Union and also a partner in the single market, it has to comply with the trade investment policy of the European Union and the foreign and security policy of the Union as well. That is the only expectation, and is something which we're going to watch and which, of course, will be underlined in the Commission's report published later this spring. We expect them to be out by May. And this is also an important aspect of something I, as a rapporteur, will be looking at when I draft my report this coming fall in the European Parliament.
Serbia has restrictive measures as part of the fight against coronavirus, relying on the advice of China experts. There is no such measures in any EU country. What do you think about them? Are they threatening to the rule of law and media freedom in Serbia?
Look, I want to underline, I'm talking to you from Slovakia, and I have been confined to Slovakia, my home country, and haven't been to Brussels really for a number of weeks now, and I'm working as a member of the parliament from here, from home. We are having a plenary session in Brussels, but we are all going to be teleworking and actually voting by distance vote later this week, also approving a whole set of other financial and budgetary support to fight the coronavirus. So we are all working under difficult circumstances. And every member state, including my own, has taken measures to restrict the movement of people, to put on protective masks. You know, I have my protective mask right here. I didn't put it on because I think I'm the only one in the room right now. But I also want to really tell the people in Serbia, whenever they see me out here in public, you know, it's like this. This is what I always put on, covering up my nose and my mouth. So what I want to say is that every country in Europe has adopted a certain set of measures to make sure that the virus doesn't spread. Now, each country has put a different focus on different things. For instance, right now we had Easter holidays in my part of Europe. You will have Easter holidays in Serbia in early May. we really couldn't move. I couldn't leave my city during the Easter holidays. And I very much appreciate this measure by the government. If you have a lot of movement of people, if people are not disciplined, the virus spreads. It spreads very quickly and it hurts people. People suffer and people die. And this is something we want to prevent. So I'm all for preventive measures. Now, you're also asking a second part of your question. Am I concerned about the rule of law? Am I concerned about the fundamental freedoms, human rights, media freedom? Yes, of course I am. And I am concerned about this all across Europe. I am a member of the LIBE committee. I am part of a monitoring group in the European Parliament, and I watch very closely what's happening across the European Union, but also beyond our borders. So yes, I'm also watching the situation in Serbia. And yes, as soon as the pandemic is over, I hope all the restrictive measures will be lifted and Serbia can enjoy a lively pre-election period and a good campaign of political actors in the run-up to elections. So yes, we are watching. Yes, we are concerned. But also, let me tell you, everybody in Europe has been taking some measures which are to help us fight the virus.
Serbian government adopted a conclusion limiting reporting on the pandemic. A journalist has been arrested. In the meantime, the conclusion was dismissed and journalist was released from custody. How do you see these acts led by Serbian authorities?
I was concerned about the arrest of Ms. Lalic, and I was also concerned about some of the news which reported the proposed law centralizing the reporting on the coronavirus. All of these measures are always an important source of concern. I was relieved to hear that Ms. Lalic was released, and I was relieved to hear that that measure restricting the freedom of information has not been pursued by the government. The government withdrew it. So, I'm watching these things, as all of us in the European institutions are. We are in touch with our counterparts in Serbia. And as I say, I think we need to have a balance. We need to have really proportionate balance. These are extraordinary circumstances. People are threatened. People are dying. We cannot be overrun by a number of sick people, because then the capacity of our hospitals will not be able to cope and handle. And this is why we have these restrictive measures, and this is why we need some discipline across the countries in Europe and also in the Western Balkans. It is important. At the same time, the measures have to be in proportion to the situation. So we'll be watching them, we'll be monitoring, and as I say, the Commission is looking at these things as well. It will be publishing the report in May. And I hope as soon as the conditions become a bit more acceptable, as soon as we get the pandemic under control, as soon as we are able to take measures to come back to life as we used to know it, relaxing some of these constraints. I hope that also goes for a number of issues restricting the public space, our freedoms, and of course also the media space. That is important.
You already mentioned the EU Special Representative for the Belgrade-Pristina dialogue has been appointed. When do you expect negotiations to continue, and what result do you expect?
Yes, Miroslav Lajčák has been appointed. I'm pleased. I think it's another important signal for the region, also a signal that the European Union is seriously engaged in some of the most difficult issues in the region, security questions, but also the dialogue between Pristina and Belgrade. I think we have to be realistic. I've been in touch and have spoken to Miroslav Lajčák, and we have to be a bit patient. I don't think we can expect the dialogue to begin during the acute phase of the crisis. There has to be conditions under which the representatives in the region from Pristina and Belgrade are able to meet in person, and of course with the special representative. So it'll take weeks, maybe several months before the negotiations really do begin. But I know Miroslav Lajčák is working hard establishing his team. He's in touch with the leadership in the region, talking to leaders across the European Union. And I see this as an important signal. Europe wants to see a true European perspective for the region, and we need to have a real dialogue between Pristina and Belgrade. And what do I expect ultimately? Ultimately, I expect a new quality of relations between these two cities, between the leaderships in the two cities. This is important, and that's something for which Miroslav Lajčák has a broad support in Europe. And I hope if we all can achieve this, this will be also an important step towards the European perspective for the region and for Serbia. The final agreement is a final agreement. So it has to be agreed by all parties. A final agreement has to be an agreement which is an agreement agreed by Belgrade, by Pristina, by the neighbors in the region, and by the leaders in Europe. That's a final agreement has to be an agreement which can be implemented, which can be sustainable, which is not going to be questioned. And of course, we would like to see a final agreement which will satisfy all these requirements. But we are at the beginning of that effort at the moment. But of course, that is ultimately the goal. I will, for myself, I can say, but also I can speak for a number of my colleagues in the European Parliament with whom I've discussed this issue. We are very much supporting Miroslav Lajčák and his efforts. And of course, it's important that the leaders in the region engage with him as soon as it is possible and engage with him on the ground.
Mr. Bilčik, in your opinion, how has the EU responded to the crisis? Will it, and in what way, affect the future of European Union?
Look, the crisis took a number of us by surprise. I don't think many of us imagined in January what crisis we would be in by March. And for many of us, it was a shock. Although I will say that a number of European institutions warned as early as in January, member states, get ready, we really have a problem in China, and the problem could be here within days or weeks. And they were right. Of course, a number of governments didn't listen, didn't pay attention. And it's only natural that the first reaction in the European Union was by the states themselves, because it is the responsibility ultimately of the states in the European Union. The European Union is not a super state, it's not a federal structure, it's a union of states, and those states are responsible for the healthcare and for the health of their citizens. So individually, they responded in the fastest way. But of course, the collective response of the European Union has come since, and I think it has come in a very strong way. We all realize this is a European problem. This is not a problem of a single country. Everybody has it to a small or a large degree. And I think we are realizing we will need a strong European solution. We need good coordination of our individual actions to safeguard the achievements which we have already seen in our ability to slow down the spread of the pandemic. So we have to look after the health of the people. We have to look after the safety of the citizens. This is what we are confronted with at the moment. But of course, then the big question comes, how do we get back to normal lives? How do we reconstruct the European economies? How do we start moving around again? With what steps? So we don't bring on the pandemic again. You know, it could come back in waves. Nobody knows how quickly this will end. So we have to be very careful. And this is where the European Union becomes extremely important. We have to coordinate our steps. We have to coordinate our help. We have to coordinate and pool, combine our financial and economic resources. And of course, all of this will have to involve, and will involve, I'm convinced, the Western Balkans. Because we are all in this together. And there is only one future for the Western Balkans. There is only one future which I am going to fight for in Serbia, and that's the European future. So I think Europe, if we are to survive this, can only come out of this stronger. And I hope it does. And Coming out stronger also means that ultimately we'll have a stronger European link, and stronger European connection to the people in the Western Balkans, to the people in Serbia. I will certainly do my best to strive for these efforts in the European Parliament, and I hope we can succeed in this.